My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I used to believe that family vacations were meant to heal old wounds, that somehow a change of scenery could stitch together the places where blood ties had frayed. But that illusion shattered the moment I realized my daughter wasn't standing beside me when the rest of the family walked into the hotel lobby, smiling. They were chatting like they'd just returned from a cruise or a spa day, carefree, glowing. My mother's voice echoed off the marble floors something about dinner reservations. My sister Amber was flipping through her phone, and her kids Caleb and Lily were snickering about something I didn't catch at first. But I caught what wasn't there. Rose, 18 years old, my only daughter, the one I thought I was keeping safe by organizing this whole trip. She wasn't trailing behind them. She wasn't anywhere. I glanced toward the elevators, checked the gift shop, looked outside, scanning the driveway as if she might just appear out of thin air. Dread settled into my chest like cold iron. I turned to my husband Marcus, who had noticed it too. "Where's Rose?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me. It came out too sharp, too strained. Dad barely turned his head. "She's probably on the next flight." The next flight, I repeated, heart beginning to hammer. Mom waved it off with a flick of her hand. She lost her passport at the layover. There was some confusion. She's sorting it out. A flicker of alarm shot through me. "At which layover?" I asked. There was a pause. Not long, just long enough to feel like freefall. "In Khartoum," my father finally said. I stopped breathing for half a second. Khartoum, as in Sudan. He nodded nonchalantly. "It was faster and cheaper. I got us a better deal." Sudan, a do-not-travel zone, a country with no U.S. embassy. And my daughter, my 18-year-old daughter, was there alone without her passport. I felt Marcus stiffen beside me. Amber didn't even flinch. Caleb nudged his sister and laughed. You should have seen her panic when she realized she wasn't getting on the plane. Lily giggled. She was about to cry. I stared at them like they were strangers. No worse, like they were predators who had found a way to smile through cruelty. "You left her behind," I whispered. "She's 18, Dad replied flatly, "not a child." Amber rolled her eyes. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." She said she'd figure it out. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not loud, not visible, like a joint slipping quietly out of socket. Subtle, but irreversible. Because I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. They knew. They knew she didn't have her passport. They knew Sudan wasn't safe. And they left her anyway. If you've ever felt your heart stop mid-beat because you sensed something terrible had happened, please leave a like and stay with me. Because I need to tell you what I did next. How I responded not just as a mother, but as a woman who had been silent far too long. Let's keep going. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing in the middle of the hotel lobby, and the next I was on a couch, cold sweat pooling behind my knees, my mind trying to piece together the impossible. Sudan. My daughter. Alone. I had planned this trip for months, picked the resort, covered every dollar, flights, transfers, excursions. It was supposed to be a celebration, a way to bring everyone closer after years of polite distance. But now, I was staring at the faces of the people I'd tried so hard to reconnect, and all I saw was indifference. Marcus broke the silence beside me. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You routed our daughter through Sudan, without telling us." "She's 18, my father repeated like that number was a magical shield. "She can handle herself." "You do realize the U.S. State Department has that country on a level 4 do-not-travel advisory," Marcus said. "There's no embassy, no consular services, no safety net." Mom shrugged. "Well, the original flight got canceled. Your father found a better route." "A cheaper route," I snapped. "Same thing," Dad replied. "And look, we made it here, didn't we?" That was the moment I understood. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck or bureaucratic oversight. It was a choice. A calculated decision to save a couple $100 at the cost of my daughter's safety. And they didn't even blink. Amber crossed her arms. "We told Rose to stay near the airport help desk. She'll figure it out." "Which help desk?" I demanded. Blank stares. "You don't even know where you left her." "She didn't want to go through Sudan in the first place," Lily muttered from the side. "She kept saying it wasn't safe for women or whatever." "She was being a baby," Caleb added. "Like, calm down. It's not the end of the world." Marcus's arm moved slightly, just enough to block me. He must have felt the fire rising in me. "She fits in better over there anyway, doesn't she?" Caleb said with a grin. "Her dad's black, right?" Everything went still. Even Lily glanced up from her phone. "Excuse me," I said, voice shaking now, not with fear but fury. "I didn't mean it like that," Caleb backtracked, still smirking. I'm just saying she was freaking out over nothing. Amber tried to wave it off. He's a kid, don't twist his words. No, not this time. I stood up slowly, every muscle tense. You rerouted a flight through a hostile country to save money. You left an 18-year-old girl alone, passportless in a nation with no consulate. And now you're laughing about how scared she looked. Marcus's jaw clenched. Why didn't one of you stay back with her? Why didn't just one adult stay behind and help? Dad looked genuinely confused. Because we're already here. Because we're already here. Like that was a reason. A justification. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. Marcus tried hers. Same result. Maybe her phone died, Mom said. We told her to stay near the desk. I turned to her slowly. The desk? Where you abandoned her. No one answered. And that was when I knew. They didn't care. Not really. Not about Rose. Not about the danger. Not even about how this might tear our family apart. All they cared about was getting their cheap vacation, avoiding inconvenience, and pretending it wasn't their problem. I've stayed quiet most of my life. Tried to be polite, accommodating the peacekeeper. I was the responsible one, the grown-up. But at that moment, I stopped being accommodating. Because something inside me snapped, and not in a way that screams or slams doors. It was quieter than that, more final. And if you've ever reached the point where you realize your silence is the only thing keeping other people comfortable, then maybe you understand what I did next. Maybe you've done it too. And if you haven't yet, stay with me, because this was the moment I stopped waiting for apologies and started writing my own ending. I walked out of the lobby without saying another word, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears louder than the chatter behind me. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stand there 1 second longer, watching the people I once called family smile and sip tropical drinks, like they hadn't just abandoned my daughter in a high-risk country without identification. Marcus caught up with me outside, his voice low. We need to get answers, now. I nodded. I wasn't panicking, not in the way they probably expected me to. I was calm. That heavy, terrifying kind of calm that comes when your instincts have already decided you are not safe here. Not emotionally, not morally, not in this circle. We found a quiet corner of the resort cafe and sat down, phones out, both of us scrolling like our lives depended on it. In a way, they did. I was searching embassy listings, emergency contacts, flight rebooking options. Sudan had no American embassy, just as I feared. No one on the ground to help an American teenager trapped in a foreign country with no passport, no adult supervision, and no legal recourse. She's probably still in the airport, Marcus said. They wouldn't have let her leave without ID. But for how long, I whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw real fear behind his eyes. Not the nervous parent kind of fear. The my kid is in danger and I can't get to her kind. Back in the lobby, I could hear Caleb laughing again. My jaw tightened. I'm going to talk to them, I said. But Marcus shook his head. Let me try first. We returned to the suite where they were gathered. Amber had taken over the balcony, scrolling through Instagram stories like nothing had happened. Mom was sipping tea. Dad was reading the local paper, oblivious. Caleb and Lily were playing some game on their tablets. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked calmly, "Where exactly did you leave her?" Dad looked up annoyed. "We told you, at the airport." "Which part?" Marcus asked again. "Which terminal? Which gate? Which help desk?" Mom waved him off. "She stayed behind where the check-in area is. She'll be fine." Amber finally looked up. "You're being so dramatic." I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Dramatic," I repeated, stepping forward. "My daughter was stranded in one of the most dangerous places on Earth because you all decided to prioritize saving a few $100 over basic human decency, and I'm dramatic." "You're overreacting," Dad muttered. "You flew her through Sudan," I hissed. "She didn't even want to go that route. She warned you. And then conveniently she loses her passport and none of you stays behind. That's not an accident. That's a setup." There was a flicker of tension in the room now, not guilt defensiveness. "She's smart," Amber said. "You've always said that. She can figure it out." "I said she was intelligent, not invincible," I snapped. "You left her without a passport, a working phone, and no access to anyone she knows. You left an 18-year-old girl in a foreign airport with nothing." Caleb chuckled. She was being so dramatic, like shaking and everything. It was kind of hilarious. That was the moment everything in me shifted. Not rage, not grief, just clarity. "You think this is funny?" I said softly. He shrugged. "You all think this is some joke." I turned to each of them one by one. "Do you even hear yourselves?" Marcus placed a hand on my arm, grounding me. I knew if I didn't walk away, I would scream. And I didn't want to scream, not yet. I needed every ounce of energy for what I was about to do. I looked at Amber, then my parents. You didn't just abandon her. You knew she was terrified. You watched her panic. And you walked away anyway. Mom tried to step in. Lauren, sweetheart, don't, I said. Don't call me that. Not after what you did. And with that, I turned around, walked out of the suite, and headed straight for the hotel concierge desk. The woman behind the counter looked up, smiling. Hi, I said. I need access to all flight booking details and room reservations under the name Mitchell. Because if they thought they were done, they were wrong. This was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I lay in bed with the light from my laptop washing over the sheets, eyes locked on flight maps, embassy listings, travel forums, anything that might give me a foothold. Marcus was sitting in the armchair near the window, still dressed, clutching his phone like he was expecting it to ring at any second. It didn't. Rose was silent. Her phone went straight to voicemail. No message, no ping, not even a missed call. Just that hollow pause followed by, "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." I tried not to think about where she was sleeping. If she was sleeping. If she had a safe place to sit or eat or breathe. I tried not to imagine her crying in a foreign terminal, begging some indifferent airline staff member to help her. I tried not to wonder if she thought I had let this happen, but I couldn't stop the image from forming. It was the laughter that echoed most in my ears, the memory of Caleb and Lily mocking her panic, replaying it like a YouTube short. She was shaking, he said. It was hilarious. Hilarious. That word made my skin crawl. What kind of family laughs at fear? What kind of children find joy in the trauma of someone they've grown up with? What kind of parents, what kind of grandparents allow it? These were not just harmless kids. These were products of a household that had been bending the rules of cruelty for years. A family that looked at compassion as weakness and empathy as overreaction. A family that had never treated Rose as one of their own. I kept hearing Caleb's voice. She fits in better over there, doesn't she? I mean, her dad's black. He'd said it like it was a joke, like her identity was a punchline, and not one person in that room had spoken up. Not Amber, not my parents, not even Lily, who just smirked and looked away. I'd been trying to convince myself for years that it was just a generational thing, that they weren't overtly racist, just tone-deaf, that the backhanded comments, the suggestions about her hair, her voice, her attitude were just poorly chosen words, not veiled resentment. But that night I stopped lying to myself. They hadn't seen Rose as family, not truly. They had seen her as optional, disposable, and now they'd proven it. Marcus stood up, finally breaking the silence. I'm going to go talk to them. I looked at him. What's the point? He paused. I don't know. Maybe just to see if there's anything left worth saving. He walked out, and I sat there staring at my screen until the door clicked again behind him, only this time someone else stepped inside. Amber, still in her designer sandals, still wearing her smirk like perfume. You're taking this way too seriously, she said, dropping onto the edge of the bed like she owned it. She's not a child. She's 18, I replied. That makes her barely an adult. And Sudan is not a gap-year study abroad program. Amber rolled her eyes. God, you're always like this, blowing things out of proportion. She's fine. You don't know that. She's smart. Amber shrugged. You've always said so. She's smart, I repeated, but she's not invulnerable. And being smart doesn't protect her from a country without a working embassy, without support, without even access to basic safety. Amber waved her hand. It's not that serious. You left her with nothing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not even the dignity of an apology. Amber stood up. You know what, you're impossible to talk to when you're like this. No, I said, standing too. I'm just done pretending this family knows what love is. She scoffed and left, muttering something under her breath. I walked to the window and looked out over the resort palm trees swaying in the night, tiki torches flickering along the paths, everything too calm, too quiet. It was surreal. Rose was out there somewhere alone, scared, possibly in danger. And the people who should have cared most were sleeping peacefully in rooms I had paid for. And that's when I decided, if they could sleep through her suffering, they could wake up to mine. The next morning, before the sun had even begun its slow rise over the resort, I was already wide awake and pacing. My stomach felt hollow, my nerves strung taut like piano wire. I hadn't heard a single word from Rose, not a text, not even a ping from Find My iPhone, just silence. Marcus was on the balcony phone, pressed to his ear, trying the airline again. I could hear his voice steady but firm, asking questions the agents couldn't seem to answer. My laptop screen still glowed on the nightstand beside me, open to a half-filled flight booking for a one-way trip to Sudan. Then there was a knock on the door. Not soft, not casual. 3 sharp entitled raps that could only belong to one person. Amber. I opened it just wide enough to see her standing there with Caleb behind her, both of them wearing matching can. We just move on expressions. We need to talk, she said. Do we? Don't be petty, Lauren. I stepped aside just enough for them to enter. Amber sat. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I know you're upset, she began. But this reaction canceling all the reservations, asking the hotel to block our charges? That's extreme. Not as extreme as abandoning my daughter, I said flatly. Amber rolled her eyes. She was being difficult. She kept making a scene about the layover. Dad was trying to fix everything. She made it harder. So you punished her? No, she snapped too quickly. Of course not. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. It was just supposed to be a joke. That caught my full attention. What was... He looked down at his sneakers, the passport thing. Marcus stepped back in from the balcony. Explain, now, Caleb mumbled. She was being annoying. Kept going on about how unsafe it was, how stupid the reroute was. He trailed off. You just what I pressed. I took her passport and hid it in my bag, he said, barely audible. I thought she'd find it after we landed. I didn't think she'd miss the flight. The room went still. Amber looked like she'd been slapped. You did what? Caleb's voice cracked. I was going to give it back, I swear. But then we were rushing to board and I didn't realize until after. And you didn't tell anyone, Marcus asked, stunned. I told Lily, he whispered. Amber turned to him, fury breaking through her smug veneer. You let your cousin get stuck in another country as a joke. He didn't answer. I stepped forward, my voice like ice. You let her panic. You watched her search. You watched her beg staff to help. And you said nothing. I thought it would be funny, he said. She was always acting like she was better than us. I couldn't breathe. Not because of what he said, but because of how familiar it sounded. That same bitter undercurrent had been floating around my family for years. Rose wasn't better, she was different. She was driven, sensitive, thoughtful. But they didn't see that as a gift, they saw it as arrogance. They never said it out loud, not exactly. But the implication had always been there. She needs to toughen up. She's too sensitive. She overthinks everything. And now here we were watching the consequences of years of small slights metastasize into something dangerous. Amber turned to me, face pale. Lauren, we didn't know. Yes, you did, I said. Maybe not about the passport, but you knew she was uncomfortable. You knew she didn't feel safe. And you still laughed. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. If you've ever had someone in your life ignore your warnings, dismiss your fear, and call it drama, leave a comment. Because it's not drama. It's a signal. A warning. And when you stop listening to those who love you most, this is what it becomes. I turned to Marcus. We're booking that flight. He nodded. Amber stood up. Wait, what do we do? I looked her in the eye. You do nothing. This time we fix it. You all stay out of the way. And just before I shut the door behind them, I added softly, oh, and if you need a new hotel, there's a discount motel down the road. No reservation required. If you've ever had to clean up a mess you didn't make just to protect someone you love, maybe you understand. Maybe you've been the one who didn't hesitate when everyone else stayed seated. And if you have, don't scroll past this. Let's keep going. Marcus and I sat in silence for a long time after they left. There was a strange stillness in the room, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stared out the window at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Somewhere far away, my daughter was stranded. Scared, maybe angry, maybe thinking I had let this happen to her. Marcus broke the silence first. I'm flying out tonight. I turned to him. We'll both go. He shook his head. One of us has to stay here. Handle the hotel. Handle them. You've already started locking things down. He was right. I'd begun the process hours earlier, canceling their rooms, revoking their access to the group excursion package, pulling back every thread of generosity I had extended when this trip first began. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it because they no longer deserved it. We'll book a return for you and Rose tomorrow, I said. One night, just enough to get her out. I opened my laptop again, fingers moving fast, searching for flights from the nearest international hub to Khartoum. The screen flickered. One seat left? Marcus stood beside me. Book it. I did, without hesitation. My hands were steady, but inside I was shaking. Because the deeper truth was, this was never just about a lost passport. This had been building for years quietly, like a fault line no one wants to acknowledge until the quake finally hits. Rose had spent her whole life walking on that fault line, and I'd let her. I thought that if I showed them kindness, patience, enough understanding, they'd see her the way I did. But they never did. Every achievement of hers was met with a redirect. That's nice, but she needs to learn teamwork. Academic success is great, but what about sports? She's so mature for her age, a compliment with a trapdoor, because what they really meant was she should know better than to speak up. And the truth is, she did know better. She saw through them long before I did. And now, because of their indifference, or worse, their intentional cruelty, she had been left in a country where she had no safety, no backup, and no escape. Marcus squeezed my hand. We'll bring her home. I nodded, even though something in me had already fractured beyond repair. That night, I barely spoke to anyone. When my mother tried knocking, I let the door stay shut. When my father sent a message, "Let's talk this through," I deleted it, unread. I wasn't interested in their justifications anymore. I didn't want to hear excuses about flight delays or passport confusion. I didn't care about their intentions. Intentions don't matter when someone is abandoned. And Rose had been abandoned. She wasn't left behind by accident. She was left behind on purpose. By people who laughed at her fear. By a boy who wanted to teach her a lesson. By adults who refused to pause their vacation long enough to notice they were destroying someone's sense of trust. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. A betrayal disguised as family dynamics. A betrayal dressed up in passive-aggressive laughter and empty she'll-be-fine platitudes. But she wasn't fine. She was in Sudan. And if you've ever had to swallow years of microaggressions, gaslighting, or subtle erasure within your own family, then you know it doesn't take a slap to break someone. Sometimes it's just being invisible when you need to be seen most. Marcus left just before midnight. I kissed his forehead, handed him a small duffel bag with everything he needed, including the passport we'd recovered from Caleb's backpack. He didn't say much, just "I'll bring her home." And then he was gone. The silence that followed was different this time. It didn't feel helpless. It felt decisive, like something had shifted. Because it had. If they wanted to pretend everything was normal when they returned, like this was all just an unfortunate hiccup in the itinerary, they were wrong. This wasn't just a trip gone wrong. This was the day I stopped being the quiet one. And if you've ever had that moment when you finally realize silence isn't peace, it's permission for others to keep hurting you, then you'll understand what I did next. Let's keep going. I didn't sleep that night either. The moment Marcus boarded his flight, I became glued to my laptop, refreshing the live tracker every 15 minutes, watching that little digital plane crawl across the Atlantic like it was carrying my entire heart. At one point, I realized my coffee had gone cold. Hours had passed and my only movement was the occasional click or scroll. The resort was still dark. Everyone else was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I could only imagine what Amber and my parents were saying behind those locked doors. Maybe they were spinning new versions of the story. Maybe they were comforting themselves with words like overreaction or miscommunication. But I didn't care anymore. I had passed the point of needing them to admit anything. That chapter was closed. What mattered now was Rose. Finding her, getting her out, making sure she really knew that we hadn't forgotten her. And then around 4:20 a.m. my phone rang. Not the silent void I had been used to hearing, not voicemail, not nothing. A real call. My hands trembled as I hit answer. "Mom," a voice said, small, cracked, hesitant. I nearly dropped the phone. "Rose, oh my God, are you okay?" She let out a breath that didn't sound like relief, it sounded like exhaustion. "I've been trying to call. Nothing would load. The Wi-Fi here is garbage. I thought my phone was broken." "You're not broken," I said, fighting back tears. "You're doing everything right. You stayed put. You stayed calm." I could hear her swallow on the other end. "They left me, Mom. I told them not to go through Sudan. I told them. I had the passport. I had it when we boarded. I know I did." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "We know. We found it. Caleb took it." Silence. Then an exhale so broken it barely sounded human. "I knew it. I told them I didn't lose it. They laughed at me, said I was overreacting, that I watched too much TikTok. They were wrong. They didn't even look for it. Grandpa just made a scene until they rebooked, and then they all left. I tried to stop them." "I believe you." Her voice cracked. "Some guy came up earlier, asked if I was married. Another said he could help if I'd owe him a favor. I've been sitting at a food stall for 5 hours pretending I'm waiting for someone." My blood turned to ice. Marcus. I needed Marcus there now. I looked at the tracker again, still hours to go. You did everything right, sweetie. Dad's on his way. He's bringing your passport. He'll be there soon. A pause. Really? Really? He's flying through Cairo. He'll be at the terminal by morning. I could hear her trying not to cry. Tell him to hurry, okay? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I will. He's already moving. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. Not crying, not screaming, just listening to the silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was purposeful. It was power. And when I opened the group hotel reservation page again, I didn't hesitate. One by one, I canceled their bookings, Amber's suite, my parents' rooms, every single reservation under my name. They didn't deserve this resort. They didn't deserve the comfort I had gifted them. The air conditioning, the spa towels, the beachfront view. Let them figure out their own way now. I heard a noise in the hallway. Raised voices. A child crying. Someone shouting, "You can't do this, we have kids." Then, the hotel manager's calm voice, "Sir, your reservation was canceled. You have 15 minutes to vacate, or we will contact the authorities." I shut my door quietly. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but because if I had to hear one more excuse, I might actually laugh. And if you've ever been pushed to the edge where you stop crying and start reclaiming, then you already know this wasn't vengeance. This was clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is a beautiful kind of freedom. If you've ever had to cut someone off, not because you stopped loving them, but because they stopped caring, leave a like and tell me your story. You than hamre not alone, and you don't than hamt have to stay silent. By the time the sun rose over the resort, I had done what I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I walked away from the idea that family means unconditional access. That morning, I made a new rule: no one is entitled to me if they can't treat the people I love like humans. My phone buzzed multiple times. Group chat messages, voicemails, missed calls, one from my mother, one from Amber, and a few from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't check any of them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were saying. Something about how they'd been blindsided, how they were being kicked out with children, how they couldn't believe I'd be so cruel. Funny, I thought. The word cruel never came up when they left my daughter in a foreign airport to fend for herself. I finally checked one message. It was from Amber, just 3 words: "You went too far." I stared at it for a moment, then opened my email. One more click, and their return flights were gone too. They had plenty of options, standby lists, last-minute economy. Let them feel what it's like to panic at the gate. Let them taste a sliver of what they served my daughter. I heard a knock, gentler this time. I opened the door to find the hotel manager, a woman named Elena, who had been kind enough to help me reroute all the bookings. Her tone was professional, but her eyes said she understood more than she could admit. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, "your family has vacated the rooms." I nodded, "Thank you." They were quite vocal. I'm sure they were. She hesitated, then added quietly, "If someone had done that to my daughter, I would have set the whole place on fire." I gave her a tired smile. I thought about it. Back in the suite, I finally let myself breathe. Not relax, breathe. There's a difference. Breathing means reclaiming space. It means not bracing for impact with every sound, every call, every sarcastic remark cloaked in politeness. Marcus messaged from Cairo. His layover had gone smoothly. His next flight was boarding in an hour. I sent him a photo of Rose's passport, just so he'd see the name on it, the proof of what had been done. He replied instantly, "We've got this." And I knew he would. Still, I couldn't sit still. I walked the hotel grounds, past couples sipping coffee, past families laughing over waffles, and for a second I felt envious. Not because they had peace, but because they didn't know how fragile peace could be. It can be ripped away not with a fight, but with a smile and a shrug. She's 18. She'll figure it out. I stopped by the front desk and asked if any charges had been disputed under my name. The concierge checked and shook his head. All settled. Good. Let them figure out how to pay for their own damage. As I turned away, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my Aunt Joan. "Your mom said there was a misunderstanding. What's going on? Is Rose okay?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I typed back, "They rerouted her through Sudan without telling us. Caleb hid her passport. They left her behind. Marcus is flying to get her now." There was a long pause. Then she replied, "Oh, no follow-up, no defense, just that single syllable of realization. Because when you lay it out plainly, what they did sounds unspeakable. And that's because it is." I sat by the pool alone for a while, just listening to the sound of water lapping against tile, and I thought about Rose. How often I had asked her to be patient, to understand, to give them time. I had raised her to be the bigger person in a room that never even wanted her in it. But now I would never ask her to shrink herself again. Not for comfort, not for peace, not even for family. And if you've ever had to unlearn loyalty to people who used it against you, maybe this moment feels familiar. Maybe you've stood in your own silence, finally realizing that you were not the one who needed to change. You were just the one who finally said enough. And if you've ever been there, I see you. And I'm standing with you. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, staring at that one-word reply from Aunt Joan. Oh. It echoed louder than any long explanation could. There was no defense, no excuse, no spin to make it sound better. Because how do you spin the fact that your own family left a teenage girl behind in a high-risk country on purpose? They hadn't just turned their backs on Rose, they had erased her. Silently, efficiently, like she was luggage too heavy to carry forward. I used to believe family was about sticking together through hard times, but now I understood something deeper. Family doesn't mean much if they only love the version of you that keeps quiet and stays convenient. Rose was never convenient to them. She asked questions, she challenged decisions, she made them uncomfortable with her clarity, and for that they punished her. The group chat pinged again. A message from Savannah Amber's daughter. It read, "This new hotel is disgusting, no AC, 2 hours from the beach. Why did you do this?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. Her discomfort mattered more to her than what they'd done to Rose. I typed a reply, then deleted it. What would be the point? There was no teaching moment here, no redemption arc waiting in the wings. This wasn't about miscommunication anymore. This was about power. About how, for years, they had used guilt manipulation and hierarchy to hold the rest of us in place. Well, not anymore. I muted the group chat, then opened my email. There were a few lingering receipts from the hotel system confirmations that all their bookings had been canceled and charges reversed. I flagged them for records and sat back, finally letting the weight of it settle. And that's when I heard the knock. Not at the door this time. At my wall. Faint, muffled voices came through the thin hotel drywall, my mother's sharp and brittle, and my father's gruff and rising. I could only make out parts. "She's punishing us. This is ridiculous. She'll come around." And then the phrase that made me sit up straight, "We raised her better than this." That was the final twist of the knife. Because no, you didn't raise me better. You raised me to be obedient, compromising, and grateful for breadcrumbs. You raised me to ignore pain in favor of politeness. You taught me to swallow disrespect if it meant keeping the family name clean. But I raised Rose differently. I raised her to speak up, to protect her peace, to recognize cruelty even when it's wearing a smile. They didn't like that, of course they didn't. Because girls like Rose are dangerous to people who thrive in silence. Marcus messaged me again. He had landed. The local contact he arranged through the connecting airport had been waiting just outside customs. He was headed to the terminal where Rose had been stuck for nearly 24 hours. I told him what Rose had said on the phone, how she'd stayed in the food court area pretending to wait for someone, how she'd avoided eye contact, how she'd fielded comments from men who saw her aloneness as opportunity. Marcus just replied, "I'll find her." Then another message. "Tell her she held it together better than most grown men I've ever known." That one got me, because it was true. My daughter had faced one of the most terrifying situations imaginable, and she didn't fall apart. She didn't collapse. She waited. She survived. But she shouldn't have had to. I looked around the room, the untouched dinner tray, the crumpled reservation printouts, the empty chair across from mine, and realized something else. This was the last time I would clean up their mess. The last time I would let them play victim while my child paid the price. So if you've ever found yourself rebuilding someone else's destruction, wondering why it's always you doing the mending, just know this. You're not crazy. You're just awake. And the moment you stop apologizing for protecting what's sacred, that's the moment you finally come home to yourself. It was almost sunset when Marcus called again. The sound of his voice, ragged but steady, was enough to pull me upright. "I've got her," he said. "She's with me now." For a moment I couldn't speak. My chest filled with something too big for words. Relief, anger, love, all tangled together in a knot that finally began to loosen. "Is she okay?" I asked. "She's exhausted, hungry, shaky," he said. "But she's okay. She saw me, and she didn't cry. She just grabbed me like she was trying to hold herself together with both hands." That image broke me. My daughter, who had always tried so hard to be strong, had been holding herself up alone for nearly 24 hours in a foreign country, because her own family decided she was expendable. I told her she doesn't have to be strong anymore, Marcus said. I told her we've got her. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, biting my lip. Tell her I'm proud of her. I already did. There was a pause. Lauren, he added, she's different. Her eyes. She's changed. I knew exactly what he meant. Some experiences strip something from you, something you don't get back. It doesn't always look like trauma. Sometimes it looks like silence, like sudden stillness. Like the way your laughter never quite returns to the same volume. They were boarding their flight soon, a one-way ticket out of that nightmare. I had already arranged everything: hotel, transport, return accommodations, even a private driver to meet them on the U.S. side. I wasn't going to let anyone else decide what Rose did or didn't deserve ever again. And right before Marcus hung up, he said something I'll never forget. She looked at me and said, I knew you'd come. That did it. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the soft buzz of the minibar fridge, the distant murmur of waves. I thought I might cry. But I didn't. I just felt still, resolved, complete. Then the knock came again. This time it was harder, insistent. I didn't even need to check the peephole. I knew who it was. I opened the door. My parents stood there, dressed like they were headed to dinner, ironed slacks, sandals, my mother's floral scarf wrapped neatly around her neck as if nothing had happened. You canceled our flights, Dad said. Correct. Mom folded her arms. You're being vindictive. No, I replied, I'm being precise. You're punishing all of us for something a child did, she snapped. I held her gaze. That child is yours, your grandchild, and you watched her suffer and said nothing. So no, I'm not punishing you. I'm refusing to reward you. Dad took a step forward. We have kids with us. And you didn't think about that when you left mine behind. I asked, my voice low, steady. You expect grace when you've offered none. Mom's eyes narrowed. Lauren, this isn't who we raised you to be. No, I agreed. This is who I became in spite of how you raised me. There it was, the line I had never dared to cross before. But now that I'd stepped over it, I saw how imaginary it always was. A wall built out of fear, guilt, and obligation. Kendra stormed up from the hallway, next, arms flailing. So that's it. You're cutting us off because of one mistake. One mistake, I repeated. You rerouted my daughter through Sudan, let your son steal her passport, left her behind, and laughed about it. Silence. You endangered her life, I continued. You made her beg strangers for help, and now you want to cry foul because I took your hotel room. No one answered. I stepped back. We're done here. Mom reached out. You're really going to do this, overreact this much? I met her eyes. She could have been trafficked. She could have been assaulted. She could have disappeared. And you all would have gone to the beach the next morning like nothing happened. Still silence. Then I said it, the sentence that closed the door. I'm not your scapegoat anymore. I'm not your bank, and I'm not your bridge back to normal. Figure out your own way home. And as I closed the door behind me, the tension didn't rise, it dissolved. Because the choice was no longer theirs. And if you've ever had to shut a door, not in anger, but in liberation, then you know how powerful it feels when silence becomes your boundary. Marcus and Rose would be home soon, and I would be ready. If you've ever taken back your peace, even when it cost you everything you were taught to protect, drop a comment and share your story, because sometimes standing up means finally sitting down and refusing to open the door again. The suite was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the kind of silence that made me uneasy. It was the kind that filled every corner like warm light. The kind that follows a storm, not because the damage is gone, but because you've survived it. I sat back on the couch, hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. My heart hadn't slowed since I closed the door on my family's last attempt to control the narrative. It was like my body hadn't caught up to the fact that I was finally free. Free from their expectations, from their manipulation, from the tightrope walk I had performed for years just to keep the peace. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from my cousin Emily. Your mom says you're shutting the whole family out. What happened? I paused, staring at the words for a moment. Then I typed back, they left Rose in Sudan. Caleb hid her passport. They all knew. They left her anyway. No emojis, no commentary, just the facts. 3 dots appeared. Then nothing. Just like that, I knew the ripple effect had started. Not that I needed validation. But I wasn't going to let them spin the story into one more Lauren overreacted again chapter. Not anymore. The hotel room felt too pristine, too still. So I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the salty breeze hit my face. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, calm, indifferent, eternal. just like the truth. And truth I'd learned didn't need to scream. It just needed to be spoken. For years, I had been the one who smoothed things over. The one who booked the flights, arranged the dinners, remembered birthdays, and forgave things that no one ever apologized for. And every time someone said something cruel to Rose, some veiled jab about her voice, her hair, her tone, I made excuses. They didn't mean it like that. It's just a joke. They were raised differently. But what if being raised differently isn't an excuse, it's a choice? And what if continuing to excuse them is also a choice? Mine. Not anymore. Rose didn't need to learn how to toughen up. The family needed to learn how to love better or not be called family at all. My phone rang. This time it was Marcus. I answered before the first ring even finished. "We just landed," he said. "Customs was easy. She's tired, but she smiled when we touched down." I breathed in sharply, holding back the tears that had been threatening for days. "Put her on," I whispered. A pause, then her voice. "Hi, Mom." My throat closed. "Hi, baby." "I'm safe," she said, her voice small but steady. "I know, I never doubted you." She hesitated. "Thank you for believing me." My heart broke all over again. "You never needed to prove anything to me. I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner." "You did," she replied. "You're doing it now." And then the thing that caught me off guard, she laughed. Soft, tired, but real. What I asked, half smiling. "I was just thinking that Grandma's probably losing her mind." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, finally letting the laughter escape. "You have no idea." After we hung up, I sat still for a while. Just breathing, just being. It was a feeling I didn't recognize at first because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's guilt. And if you've ever been the one to finally drop the burden, to set it down and walk away, not because it got lighter, but because you got stronger, then you know exactly how that moment feels. The next time someone tells you that blood is thicker than water, remind them so is cement, and it'll drown you just as fast. I looked back at the quiet, sweet mine alone now and realized I wasn't alone at all. Because even though my family had shrunk, my peace had expanded. If you've ever reclaimed your peace from the people who used to define it, hit that like button and leave a comment below. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is finally live on your own terms. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the ocean in streaks of orange and violet, I found myself standing at the edge of the shore, my feet sunk into warm sand waves brushing against my ankles. The sky was impossibly wide. It felt like the world was exhaling, like it was giving me permission to do the same. Rose and Marcus were safe. That truth alone felt like an anchor after days of spiraling chaos. But as much as I wanted to leave it there to close the chapter and move on, I knew I couldn't. Because there was still one last layer to peel back. I hadn't just spent this week dealing with betrayal. I'd spent my entire adult life negotiating my worth with a family who only respected silence. And now that I had finally said no more, the pushback was louder than ever. When I got back to my suite, there were 3 new voicemails waiting. One from Mom, one from Dad, and one from Amber. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I scrolled through the family group chat, the one I had muted for days. New messages were pouring in from cousins, aunts, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to since my wedding. It was clear they'd heard some version of the story. One cousin asked, "Is it true you left your parents without rooms?" Another, "Caleb's just a kid, Lauren. Maybe this is a teaching moment, not a war." A teaching moment. That phrase stopped me cold. Because I agreed, just not in the way they meant. Yes, it was a teaching moment, but not for Caleb, for me. I had finally learned that being the bigger person doesn't mean shrinking to make others comfortable. It doesn't mean writing off cruelty as immaturity. And it certainly doesn't mean making peace with betrayal just to preserve appearances. That's not strength. That's surrender. And I was done surrendering. So I opened the group chat and typed a single message. No emotion, no heat, just truth. They rerouted my daughter through a country with no U.S. embassy. Caleb stole her passport, they all knew, and they left her behind. You can decide for yourselves what that says about them. I've already decided what it says about me. Then I left the group, not just digitally, emotionally, spiritually, forever. The next morning, Rose and Marcus arrived at the resort. I met them in the lobby, the same lobby where I had first realized she wasn't with them. But this time she was, and I almost didn't recognize her. Not because her face had changed, but because something in her eyes had hardened, matured far too quickly. She moved with caution, with a new kind of awareness I hadn't seen before. It broke my heart. But when she saw me, her guard dropped. She walked into my arms and let me hold her. No one said anything for a long time. We just existed, the three of us, in the quiet, in the safety of what we had rebuilt. Later, as we sat by the water, she asked, "Are they gone?" "From the hotel," I asked. She shook her head. "From our lives." I looked at her, then at Marcus, and I said it clearly, calmly. "Yes." She didn't cry, she just nodded. And I understood that for her this wasn't just survival, it was a turning point. She had seen what it looked like to be discarded by people who should have protected her. And now she had proof that we wouldn't be those people. Not ever. We stayed at the resort for 3 more days. Just the 3 of us. We swam, we laughed, we sat in silence when we needed to, and we made a promise, not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind made in glances and gestures, that this us was enough. If you've ever found your strength not in confrontation, but in quiet, deliberate departure, you understand. Some goodbyes aren't screamed, they're whispered, and they still carry the full weight of freedom. On our last morning at the resort, I woke up before sunrise. The sky outside was still dark, just beginning to tint, with that early pink that comes before the world decides to start again. I didn't want to wake Rose or Marcus, so I slipped out quietly, wrapped in a light cardigan, and stepped onto the beach barefoot. The sand was cool and damp. Each step felt like walking through the past week all over again, soft but heavy, like the weight of everything I had carried and finally set down. I stared out at the water, letting the quiet hum around me. I wasn't thinking about my family, not in the usual way. I wasn't rehearsing arguments or justifications. I wasn't trying to imagine how to repair anything, because something had shifted. It wasn't closure. It was clarity. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for them, the way I used to cover for my parents' dismissiveness, the way I smoothed over Amber's sarcasm so Rose wouldn't feel targeted, the way I had believed that being the bridge between generations was noble when all it did was exhaust me into silence. That silence was gone now, and in its place was resolve. I went back inside and found Rose curled up on the couch, hair-messy eyes half closed but awake. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in her since before the trip. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." She sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around her. "I had this moment," she said, "back in the terminal. I was just sitting there watching people pass by. Nobody looking at me. Nobody stopping. I remember thinking, so this is what being invisible feels like." My chest ached. "But then I kept hearing your voice in my head," she continued, saying, "Stay calm, don't panic, you're smarter than the moment you're in." You didn't actually say that, but I pretended you did. "I wish I could have been there sooner," I whispered. "You were," she said, not looking at me, "just not the way I expected. But you showed up. You always show up, even if it takes a little longer than it should." I sat beside her and we just leaned against each other. No performance, no pretending we were fine. We weren't fine, but we were together. Later that afternoon, as we checked out of the resort, I ran into the concierge again. Elena, the one who had helped me pull the rug out from under my family's entitled vacation. She gave me a small smile. "Heading out?" "Yes," I said, glancing over at Marcus and Rose. "Time to go home." "I hope everything worked out." "It did," I said. "Not perfectly, but the right things survived." She nodded like she understood. Then she leaned in slightly. "We had to call local authorities after your family refused to leave the other hotel. It got dramatic." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. My mother said this isn't how she raised me." "She may have used those exact words," Elena said with a smirk. I exhaled somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Thank you for helping us, for not asking too many questions." Elena paused before replying, her tone gentler now. "You'd be surprised how many stories like this I hear, especially from women. Sometimes the strongest ones are the quietest." That stuck with me, because that's what this whole trip had been, hadn't it? Not a loud revolution, but a quiet reclamation of my voice, of Rose's safety, of our right to be loved without conditions. We boarded our flight that evening. No fanfare, no tears. Just a long, calm silence between us, broken only by the occasional hand squeeze from Marcus or the quiet rustle of pages as Rose read a novel she picked up from the airport bookstore. When we landed, I turned my phone back on. Dozens of messages, some asking for explanations, some guilting me, some pretending like nothing had happened. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I blocked them, all of them. Because sometimes loving yourself and your child means accepting that certain people don't deserve access to you, not even a little. If you've ever had to close the door on a lifetime of emotional debt just to protect your own peace, you know how terrifying and beautiful that moment can be. It's not an ending. It's an arrival, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking toward freedom. The return home felt surreal. Our house was exactly as we'd left it, quiet, organized, predictable. The porch light still flickered from a faulty sensor. The scent of lavender still lingered in the hallway from the diffuser I'd forgotten to unplug. Everything around us was familiar. But we were not the same. Rose moved through the house slowly, almost cautiously, like she was waiting for something to break. She didn't speak much the first night. She took a long shower, slipped into oversized pajamas, and curled up on the living room couch without turning on the TV. She just stared out the window. I sat with her, not pressing, not pushing. Just there. I'd learned finally that sometimes presence is louder than words. Marcus joined us after unpacking. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, and asked gently, "What do you need right now?" Rose didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I need to know that I don't have to pretend everything's fine." And that sentence, it shattered something in me. Because that had been the unspoken rule for years, hadn't it? Keep things light. Keep the peace. Make excuses, cover wounds, smile through betrayal. I leaned over, took her hand, and said, "You don't owe anyone your peace if they've done nothing to earn it." She looked at me, eyes brimming with something I couldn't name: anger, grief, relief. "They're going to keep trying, aren't they?" "They already have," I said. "Calls, messages, excuses." She nodded like she knew, like she expected it. "They'll make it about you now." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "They'll tell everyone you blew it out of proportion, that you overreacted, that you split the family, that I was being dramatic and you enabled it." I exhaled slowly. "Probably. Does it bother you?" I paused. It had, for years. The fear of being cast as the villain in someone else's version of events. But now, "No," I said, "because what they think isn't more important than what you lived through." She nodded again. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I'm proud of you." I blinked. "What?" "You always told me to speak up," she said, "to set boundaries, but you didn't do it for yourself. Not really. Until now." I looked at Marcus, who gave me a quiet nod like he agreed. And in that moment, something inside me healed. Not all the way, not completely, but enough to take that first clean breath after years of emotional smog. We spent the weekend doing ordinary things. Cooking dinner together, watching old movies, walking around the neighborhood in hoodies and sandals, letting the September breeze undo the knots in our chests. It wasn't some fairy tale ending. There were still moments Rose flinched when her phone buzzed, times when I second-guessed my decision, but they passed faster each time. And then on Monday morning, I did something I had been putting off for years. I logged into the family insurance account, the one that covered my parents, Amber, even Savannah and Caleb. The one I'd been funding for over a decade because it was just easier that way. I clicked remove dependent, one by one. No warning, no guilt, no explanation. Just click, click, click. And with every name that disappeared from that list, I felt the weight on my shoulders get lighter. By the time I closed the browser, I was almost laughing. Not because I was angry, because I was free. Later that day, my mother texted me, "Are you still paying for the insurance I need to schedule a doctor's appointment?" I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed, "No, we're not." And that was it. No follow-up, just silence, which for once felt like a victory. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't "I forgive you." It's "I'm done." If you've ever stopped pouring into people who only ever left you empty, tell me in the comments, what did freedom look like for you? Because for me, it looked like one simple sentence. No, we're not. 3 weeks later, our lives had settled into something that resembled peace. Not the fake kind we used to wear like armor around family dinners, but the kind that shows up in little ways. Like the way Rose no longer jumped when the doorbell rang. Or how Marcus stopped checking his email at midnight, waiting for some angry cousin's message to explode. Or how I, for the first time in years, felt no obligation to answer a phone call I didn't want. We had built a new rhythm. Sunday breakfasts on the patio, movie nights with no interruptions. A group chat with just the three of us where we shared inside jokes and memes and support, nothing toxic, nothing performative. Just real quiet love. But then one afternoon something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. I knew the handwriting. My father's. For a second I didn't move. Just stared at the envelope like it was ticking. Rose noticed. "Is that from them?" I nodded. Marcus stood beside me. "Do you want to read it?" I didn't answer right away. Then I tore it open. Inside was a single page, short, controlled, like every word had been chosen carefully to walk the tightrope between guilt and pride. Lauren, we know you're angry. We think you've made your point. Families fight, but they always come back together. It's time you stop holding this over everyone's heads and come home. Amber's birthday is coming up. You're expected. No apology. No ownership. Just expectation. I laughed, a soft, stunned laugh. Because here they were, again reaching out, not to reconcile, but to reset the script. To pretend nothing happened. To pull me back into the role of peacekeeper while they rewrote the past. I passed the letter to Marcus. He read it silently, then handed it to Rose. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "They still think they get to decide the ending." I smiled at her. Let's show them they don't. That night, I sat down at my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote a letter of my own. Not to them, to myself. I wrote every truth I had swallowed over the years. Every moment I had dismissed my own pain to protect theirs. Every time I allowed their convenience to outrank my dignity. I ended it with a promise. You never have to go back there again, not physically, emotionally, or mentally. You are not the villain for saving yourself. You are the hero for surviving them. Then I folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it into the back of my journal. A reminder. Not of the hurt, but of the healing. A week later, Rose started therapy. She asked me to come to the first session. She spoke in full sentences, honest ones, hard ones. She told the therapist what it felt like to be discarded, what it felt like to be chosen last, and how she was learning not to tie her worth to people who only loved her when she was useful. I held her hand the entire time, and when we walked out of that office, the sun was just starting to set. She looked taller, not in height, but in spirit. She said, "You know, for the first time, I'm not scared they'll come back. I'm scared I'll forget how bad it was and let them in again." "You won't," I said, "because you remember now. And you don't owe them a second chance just because they're family." We walked to the car not in silence, but in something better. Understanding. This is how healing happens. Not in explosions, not in big confrontations or public victories, but in soft choices, quiet boundaries. A daughter learning she deserves protection. A mother learning she deserves peace. A family choosing each other for real this time. If you've ever had to walk away from the people who raised you, just to finally raise yourself, know this. You didn't break the family. You broke the cycle. And that's how legacy begins. Looking back, I don't see a broken family anymore. I see a woman who finally chose herself. I see a mother who stopped shrinking so others could shine. I see a daughter who no longer measured her worth by how much pain she could endure in silence. There was a time I would have done anything just to be invited in. To sit at their table, laugh at their jokes, prove I was good enough. But I've learned that some doors aren't locked, they're just not meant to be opened again. And that's okay. Because peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you build, slowly, quietly, boldly. My story isn't about revenge, it's about release. About walking away not to punish anyone, but to protect the version of me that's still healing. To show my daughter that her worth isn't negotiable. That love without respect is just manipulation wrapped in nostalgia. If you've ever felt like the outcast at your own table, if you've ever been told to stay quiet, to not make a scene, or to be the bigger person while you were being torn apart, know this. You are allowed to leave the room where you are being erased. And if this story touched something in you, if you've seen pieces of your own journey in mine, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, speak it, live it. If you believe we all deserve the right to choose peace over performance, love over loyalty, and truth over silence, subscribe to this channel. Let's write the next chapter together.